King, Mr. Bill Brown, and Mr. Richard Newton. Today is April the 22nd, 2006, and our interview is being held at the home of Yvonne Harris in the Mooresville Mill Village. This is one of the original Mooresville Mill Village homes. And these three gentlemen grew up down here, and they're going to tell us all about their experiences living and growing up in the Mooresville Mill. So, Mr. King, we'll start with you.
Well, I was raised, in fact, right down the street here at 419. And I can remember back as a young kid, the dirt roads, we had no paved roads, and summer dust everywhere that they'd bring oil collected in all the streets. And we had, they were community stores, you know, we had no big chains, you know, like that. But Frank Moore owned a little store right down the street down here, and I used to work in there. And I would deliver groceries, and everybody at the mill down there, and some had money, I guess, but I don't know if anybody did. We weren't poor, we just didn't have any money.
What time period were you talking about?
Probably around, I would say 1940.
Okay.
42. So everybody at the mill would go down and buy their groceries from Frank, and he would charge them. And then when they got paid on Wednesday, they would come down and pay the groceries off, you know. And, so the houses had no underpinning, and well, of course, we had the pot belly stoves, you know, and then throw coal up under the house, and we'd have to haul coal in, you know, and keep the fires going. And then I remember Mama had a wood stove. We cooked on the old-timey wood stove in the kitchen, and they would haul slabs, truckloads of slabs, and then another truck would come in with a saw and saw them up, and we'd have to cut the wood and, you know, stack it under the house. And of course, our job was to haul the wood in. And I don't know how we ever survived. You know, there were 6 of us, and where we slept, you know, no more bedrooms than there were. But we used to, as far as around the house and playing, we made our own toys. You know, you didn't have any bought toys. Of course, kids now don't know how to use a screwdriver, much less a hammer. We made little carts, skateboard. We'd take our wheels off the skates. And then we would have girls who play hopscotch, and they'd cut paper dolls out of Sears Roebuck catalogs. And we had Bill, I remember, of course, the church, that was the center of our life.
Which church was that?
That was the Second Presbyterian Church, right up on the corner. You know, they make condos out of it now. And I've got, I believe it was Gray Westmoreland, I believe was our teacher, and he used to take us down on outings. We'd play Mumbly Peg. I don't know if you've ever heard of Mumbly Peg or not. Yeah. Where you take a long stick, you know, and you'd have a little twig and lay it over another, and you would hit it with a stick, it would fly up in the air, and you'd knock it so far, then the other guy would do the same thing.
That's Peggy. That's Peggy, yeah.
Peggy also.
Mumbly Peg or
Mumbly Peg was a knife, but Peggy was a stick.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
You picked it up and hit it. I'd give you 25 steps. If he got to the stick in 25 steps, he got 25 points.
Right.
If he didn't, I got 25 points. And long legs were a benefit back.
Oh yeah, that's right.
But did you remember the penalty? If you didn't make it, you got to drive that peggy in the ground. How many licks you missed it? And he had to root for it with his teeth.
Well, we didn't go that way.
So obviously y'all played a different way.
Well, we played similar games, like I said, we made up our own games.
Okay.
Then the Iceman, he would come around. I think come around every day, I believe. Mm-hmm. And, put the ice on the back porch. Of course, you had a hole in the floor where it would drip, you know, through there. And I can remember back, you could have hogs in the city limits, back right down at the bottom of the hill down here, there used to be hog pens. You remember Mr. Newton?
Yeah.
He had the hogs, and he'd kill hogs every year, and I forget the lady's name, come around with a slop wagon, collecting, leftovers and go down to feed the pigs. And, let's see, let me think.
Did those pigs belong to her, or were they just?
No, they belonged to Mr. Newton.
But she collected the
Yeah,
slop
Right,
from
slop, go down to feed the hogs.
Individuals had pig pens too.
Yeah.
We lived on Messick Street. We had a hog pen, and Daddy raised hogs. And Mr. Conrad Edmiston helped him kill them every year. And we'd have the tenderloin first.
Yeah.
And that was the best stuff. That'd be very high up. That's low on the
Right,
high, but it's
low.
good.
And chickens, everybody had a chicken on Sunday. Of course, my daddy had a chicken coop. He would keep chickens in it. And of course, I got brave one day and I wanted to kill the chicken. So I got out that chicken. I started wringing his head off, and the chicken run around. So that was cruel. So finally, the next week, tied his legs on the clothesline and took a butcher knife, cut his head off. Then you had to scald the chicken and pluck the feathers and singe it. And, the smell wasn't too good, but that's about the only meat we had, So, other than that, of course, all up through the years, been Bill, we were best friends since knee-high to grasshopper. And we would sit around the church up there at night, watch the girls come by. That's after we got up, up, 15?
Oh yeah, 14, 15. The biggest occupation was mowing grass, remember?
Oh, yeah. So Bill got the contract with the public library to mow the yard up there, so he hired me to help him, and what did we make, $4 apiece?
No, we actually, that was our best job. We made $3.
Oh,
But Miss McNeely was a librarian then, Miss Branch McNeely. She taught me in first grade and a lot of other people in Mooresville. And she was very strict. We'd have to trim the edge of the sidewalk with the clippers, trim the hedge. She'd go out and check everything. Probably about a 4-hour job. When we finished that job, we got $3, $1.50 a piece.
Yeah.
We'd go across Community House Yard to Chris Grocery. Mr. Chris had a grocery on the corner there across from Second Presbyterian Church. And we'd get us a big 16-ounce Pepsi, pack of peanuts.
Yeah.
We'd be off for the day. That was all we did.
That's right. So.
We had other jobs too. We mowed grass yards in this, we call them yards. We mowed yards in this area every week with a push lawnmower.
Hose lawnmower, when you got through, you had to take a sling, cut all the high weeds down. These lawnmowers wouldn't cut the weeds. And you had to take a file and file the blades down, and you had a little adjustment where you adjust the blade. So the community house, we had a little ball team up there, everybody meet up there in the summertime, we'd play ball, and then sometimes they would line us up with a team out of town. So we had no fancy buses, they'd throw us on the back of a big old truck, herd us like cattle over to Kannapolis, you remember that?
Kannapolis and Hickory we went to.
Yeah, places like that.
That's the Bradford's truck. He was moving.
Bradford, right,
Remember
Bradford.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Paul.
Paul Bradford, I was thinking. So did the community house belong to the mill?
It did.
And so, but it was for the neighbor. It was for the use of the neighborhood.
They had a daycare program. They kept mill workers put their children in the nursery school type program. Now I imagine Richard, they had probably 100 children. The parents would drop them off in the morning, and the people there, the employees, would take care of them, feed them lunch. And there are pictures of the youngsters sleeping out in the yard on their cots in the summertime, taking their nap. Miss Nadine Nelson worked there. She still lives here in Mooresville. And Miss McGehee was the person in charge. Mr. Davidson, Mr. Clayton Davidson, was the mill employee, the supervisor, Richard, who were looking after that part. And they had tennis courts there, they had horseshoe pits, swings and things for the children. They had a swimming pool. Every day they filled it up. And after the youngsters had had their time in the pool, Miss McGehee would let us go in there and wade around. It's a small pool, but we got cooled off.
Right. Of course, they were no better ping pong players or horseshoe pitchers than me and Bill.
At that time, we were.
That's all we did.
We're getting old, we can brag now. But I did win. He won the state championship. Second in state championship.
Right.
Well, Mr. Newton, what are you've been sitting over there saying, listen. Tell us about your experiences.
Well, I was born up in the Grove. Does anybody know where the Grove is?
No.
Okay, it's just before you get to Main Street. Remember, there was some 2-story houses up there, and a lot of trees, and they call that the Grove. Remember Mr. Hall Jenkins?
Mm-hmm.
Lived right behind him where I was born. But anyway, what Art brought up about Mr. Billy Moore's store down here, he called it Frank's, but it was Billy. Billy's his daddy. The whole village from West Wilson south, which encompassed the whole village, primarily. You couldn't go hardly 1,000 feet without going to a grocery store. I run it up in my mind sort of haphazardly, and I think I counted 15 or 16 stores down in this area. You take Uncle Billy's down here, Bill alluded to Chris Grocery, but that was Dosey Cersei's store.
At that time, yes.
Yeah.
Early on.
Okay, and then you go on over on the hill was Smith's Grocery, and there was a Bumgarner's, a Young store,
Lackey's, of course.
Lackey's,
Carter
Thomas's, and Western Lands, Kelly Shoemate,
Kelly Sherrill.
Kelly Sherrill,
I worked there.
and Verbals, which was Clyde and Jesse Sherrill to start with. And then you come on up behind Lackey's. Uncle Charlie started that little store back there that Carter Crab.
Carter Crab had, yes.
Yeah. Then you come on out, Uncle Henry had a store over in Southside parking lot. And that's basically the business of the stores.
So you didn't have to walk very far to
You
get,
didn't have to walk
get your
very far.
groceries.
But if you couldn't pay your bill this week, you could always go to another one. And catch him up, then you go back to another one.
The interesting thing, Ann, was that, like Art said, he kept a book. Daddy had a book. You'd go to the store and put it on the book. But you had to have permission, and Mr. Crabb or Kelly Sherrill or Mr. Westmoreland knew that I had permission to charge something. But it was never anything for me, it was always something for home. No drinks, no candy, nothing like that. But on Wednesdays, Art said, you paid off last year's debt, then you got your grocery order for this week, and next week you'd pay it off. And many a grocery store owner, including the F.D. Stone Street on South Main Street there, at the front, right at the mill gate, the big mill gate, many of them lost big dollars over the years because people could not pay or would not pay, but they trusted you. Trust was a big factor growing up in Mooresville on the Mill Hill. You didn't lock your doors, you trusted.
No.
Now sometimes your coal might get gone, or your wood pile might go down when somebody was out of work. If the mill only ran 3 days a week, pay was short. Remember those times?
Oh, yeah.
There were times Mama would work 3 days, be off next week, sign up for unemployment. Then when the war came, it ran 7 days a week, at least 6 days a week.
At one time, Mooresville Mills employed 3,700 people at this one plant right here. 3,700 people. And our family consisted of 8 children, 5 boys, 3 girls, Mom and Daddy, and a lot of times Grandma and Grandpa stayed with us. Incidentally, the youngest is 67 now, and the oldest is 84, and all of us are still living here within 10 miles of each other, which is we're real proud of. Times were rough. We didn't have all that we needed. We had a lot of mush, rice,
Tell us what mush is.
No, it's just cornmeal.
Cornmeal mixed up.
Yeah.
Cooked.
And with fatback gravy, it's good. I'll eat it today of preference over some of these others.
Then we got grits occasionally.
Oh, yeah. Well,
a
yeah.
rare occasion.
Like fat back biscuits, there's always biscuits.
Yeah, we stopped over here at Uncle Marvin's, and Aunt Naomi would fix us a biscuit to get us on the rest of the way home.
Right. That's pinto beans, and
Potatoes, plain potatoes.
potatoes. And, I know they had that hog killing time, Marvin, the old lady, backyard had these wash pots going, They'd cook, make sausage, liver mush, and of course it's always better that way, So, I don't know how to survive. We had any sweets. Well, your mama made it. You didn't go up and buy cakes and things like that. And then, too, up here on Main Street where the office part of the mill is, there was a little strip there. And they had Stone Street's Cafe, the drugstore, White's drugstore. They had a pool room,
Yeah, East Stone Street Grocery.
grocery, and a
Well, the
barber
grocery was
shop.
before the pool room. The
So-
grocery was before the pool room.
Yeah, guess what?
So my daddy, he barbered in there for a while, so the mill paid more than the barber, so he didn't work in the mill. So I shined shoes in there for something like 10 cents, and I had to sweep the hair out. They had little fans, they didn't have any air conditioning, sweat run down your back, hair get all over you. They had a shower in the back, and people didn't have a shower in their house. They'd come from the mill and go back in the back and take a shower for 10 cents. Then they'd come get in the chair, and a lot of the men, they didn't have, disposable razors then or what. They had these long razors where you pop it on a leather belt, and they'd let the barber shave them, And we used to go in Stone Street's Cafe. That was kind of a hangout. He had the best hamburgers and hot dogs in town, if you had the money to buy one. But getting back to the store, like Uncle Billy, that was,
Yeah,
like I
Uncle
said, Frank's Dave, I always knew Frank.
He-
Frank would leave me in charge. Sometimes he'd have to go up to McNeely's in town. Remember McNeely's grocery right there? To get a cut of meat or something. While he was gone, I'd fill up on candy and ice cream. I would eat all of his ice cream up. I'd make me a cone that big before I kept looking to see if he was coming back, I was short away. But those were some good times. Then the ballpark. Bill, you want to tell them about the ballpark?
Well, I was going to tell you, I grew up on Summer Street down south behind the mill. And our grocery store was Thomas. This is Walter Thomas had a grocery
Yeah.
store. Charlie Thomas, his son, worked there. Clyde Lackey was on the corner. Mr. Thomas was around the corner. We called that the Little Front. It fronted on Main Street, and that's how it got its name, the Front. Pat Patterson had a cafe there, and Mr. Thomas grocery store, and we'd go there. Right across the road on Broad Street was the Mooresville Mills or the ballpark. Big structure then, had a nice facility. And I spent some time there, watching ball games, watching the Moors play. That was a part of our activities.
Do you remember any of the players that played for the Moors?
Oh yes, Norman Small, Ross Marr, were two big ones.
Hoyt Wilhelm.
Hoyt Wilhelm, Dave Jolly. I wrote a lot about the baseball team in my little book, and some of those guys, Hoyt Wilhelm, Hall of Famer, he was a knuckleball pitcher. Norman Small was a home run hitter. Dave Jolly went to the pros. Jim Mills, Joe Mills,
His name Thompson.
Forrest Thompson. went to the
Lars
majors.
Thompson, yeah.
Yeah.
Forrest Thompson went to the majors, Washington Senators.
But incidentally, Ross Marr worked a full-time job in the mill, and he would get off and come and play ball for the Moors. And I was down there now I happened to be there that night. He had 4 home runs
Wow.
after working a shift in the mill.
And the people in the stands, led by Mrs. Ann Sherrill, made up money for him. And that was quite a feat. They passed the hat, so to speak, and gave Ross a gift of money. And that 4 home runs was quite
Yeah,
something.
that was.
That was a record for a long time.
Correct, yeah.
Norman Small was a home run hitter.
Oh, yeah.
Brooks Harrington played short. Eddie Walzak played third, Ray
Marty
played second.
Polio, or
Polio played first. A number of players, and they all worked in the mill. I think
Yeah.
Norman
Yeah.
looked after the ballpark.
right.
He was
So,
always
so they worked in the mill, but they played on the ball team as
Yes.
well.
And actually, it was well known that the job they had in the mill, Richard, was not like running a set of looms or dolphin claw. They were given an easy jobs. I have a picture of Ross carrying a clipboard around, recording things. So pushing a pencil was quite different from running 30 looms and cutting cloth off of 60.
Yeah, while you're talking about that, tell us what kind of fabric was being produced at the mill during this time.
During the wartime, they made poplin for pants pockets.
Yeah.
The cloth they made was used by the military for pockets in pants. They made gingham.
Well,
they made
before that, they made a lot of ginghams and
towels.
pants material. They run towel looms. Well, this was home of the Mooresville Moors, you know, and it had the Turkish towel symbols out front and all this on the building.
I'm
They
going
even had about the only loom they didn't have was a jacket.
Mhm.
They had lino. That lino weave was something to see, but most of them were drapers and C&K, Stafford, and stuff
Love
like that.
Stafford, yes.
Yeah. Big
I'm
Stafford, little
going to
Stafford.
stop just a minute because we have the Mooresville Mills logo and I want to give it to one of you all to put in our video. Mr. King is holding the logo for the Mooresville Mills that Mr. Newton just referred to, and you mentioned the Turk. Do y'all know anything about the history of this logo?
Turkish towels was part of that. Fletcher Davis did that for the mill, and there are pictures available of how that was on the top of the mill. Some of the pictures of the mill show the big sign that carried this logo and
The little tents.
little tents and so forth, Moroccans and so on. But the origin has to do with the Turkish towel, the way it was weaved. And see, Mooresville at first, Richard, I believe, produced towels primarily.
Oh yeah.
Towels and washcloth.
Yeah.
And they had a room called the towel room. And people who worked in the towel room dressed differently because their job was not dirty, their job was not hot, even though it was hot in the mill in the summertime. The ladies folded the towels, they folded the washcloths, they put them in packs of 6 or a dozen for shipping. And the windows were open, you could walk by and look in and see them working in there.
Also, if one of the employees needed towels or washcloths, you just throw them down on the floor and scoot them across with your foot and throw them in the soil bin. They were 15 cents a pound.
A lot of homes were furnished with those type
Yeah.
washcloths.
Fringe benefit.
Fringe benefit.
Yeah.
The mill didn't realize that.
Okay, you mentioned, were the homes owned by the people or were most of
Homes
them?
were owned by the mill and rented by the people, paid so much per room,
25 cents a room.
25 cents a room, and that came out of your check. And you see, it was, you almost had to work in the mill to have a place to live. If a person lost his job in the mill, he had to move out.
I remember coming home from school one day and see people's furniture out in the middle of the street on several occasions.
They call it setting out. We're going to set the Browns out, or the Kings out, or the Newtons out. They aren't working here. Now, during the strike, there were a lot of people set out.
Talk about the strike. Do you remember the strike?
The what?
When there was a strike at the
Oh,
mill?
yeah, okay. Hardly anybody worked. Fact is, Cecil and I, we lived it's a brother of mine, saw a bunch of workers out at the mill gate, and they were throwing rocks. We thought that was the grandest thing that ever happened. And we got us some rocks and threw them in those windows, and Mama called us. But then, the people that were shut out, they had nowhere to go, so they'd go to the lower end of town to the trash gully. And you talk about some of the deprived people, today they live like mansions. Those people would cut old barrels open and spread them out and nail them to some timbers in order to have a shelter to get under. No house whatsoever. Nail up old boards or anything just to have a room to get in. And that was their home, in that gully,
Are you speaking about that big gully that's down
down
south of?
Parker Avenue.
They used cardboard, they used anything they
Anything
could
they
to
could
make a
find.
shelter. There's a lot about the strike that I tried to chronicle one time, and there's no other written history of the strike at that time. So going back to old newspapers and things of that nature, and interviews. I did a lot of interviewing to get people who knew about the strike and were well aware of what was going on during that time.
What year was that strike?
1935 in Mooresville.
Yeah.
35.
I remember a lot of Sunday mornings. Well, we didn't have much to eat. We were lucky if we had an egg. But a lot of the hubbos, they'd get off the train and they'd come straight to our house. And of course, we'd eaten everything inside, but Mom would always put some mush or grits or whatever we had and stir them up some and feed them a biscuit if we had one left. And they was on their way. They always knew that was the easy stop. They'd get something to eat.
Okay. Okay, we have an addition to our video at this point. Mr. John Crisp stopped by, and he had, evidently someone told him about this, so he stopped by to join us for our video. And when we stopped, we were talking about the strike. So continue telling us about the strike, Bill.
Strike in 1935 in Mooresville, of course, a strike in the southeast, 1934, great uprising. People were being worked long hours, 12, 14-hour days, low pay, and they inaugurated what was called the stretch-out system. And that is, if you ran 20 looms last month, you might be asked to run 40 looms this month, and put the person to a very large amount of work, and they called a stretch-out. So the people rebelled against that. And Mooresville, people in Mooresville, mill workers there, rebelled also, and there was a strike here. They brought the National Guard in, and they had the Sheriff Department working. The people who worked were people who thought, well, I'm going to work, I need to work. The people who struck formed the picket lines, and the workers had to cross the picket lines, and they were called names and referred to as scabs because of the way they handled it. Mr. Luke Dorton, who I worked with a lot when I did a book, worked round the clock. He stayed in the mill, keep the mill, his job going. And of course, I think he was criticized, but it showed that people wanted to work, but they wanted fair treatment. Of course, Franklin Delano Roosevelt got involved. People from Mooresville wrote him letters about the situation in Mooresville. And there was talk that the Communist Party was in Mooresville, and that they were behind this. Cannon Mills in Kannapolis. Mr. Cannon spent money to help the people in Mooresville to keep from closing down because they didn't strike in Kannapolis at that time. If they had struck there at Cannon Mills, he would have suffered financially. So he spent money here. In one story that was told by Mr. Sam Edmondson, they mounted a machine gun on top of the mill in case they needed that machine gun to squelch the crowd. And people worked, people carried guns to go to work, carried big wrenches so that if anybody picked on them, they'd have something to defend themselves. But that history tells that the people in Mooresville, there was separation socially, the Mill Hill kids, the Mill Hill people, and the people in other areas. But the people in other areas made their living because of the people who lived on the Mill Hill. We bought clothes at Belk. We bought shoes at Belk. We spent money, our parents did. So we'd all work together. But the strike was mainly a rebellion against the stretch-out system, the low wages, and the long hours.
How was it resolved?
People finally gave in, went back to work because the owners of the mill relented. 8-hour shifts, no more employing people 12 years old. They had an age limit. That came from the federal government. And they resolved it by giving better wages, cutting back on the amount of work required. And when Burlington bought the mill, it was really something because they had their own hidden stretch-out system. You had to make production. And one reason my mother stopped working in the spinning room because she couldn't make production. If you didn't make production, you didn't make the best hourly wage. So a lot of people had to leave because of age and condition. But they had people going around checking with a clipboard making sure you were on the job and making sure you were getting your work done. You kept the ends up on the spinning frames. You kept the looms running. You kept things going. That's all part of the mill village, part of growing up on the mill hill.
Well, you had to really have a connection to get your job back. A lot of them, they wouldn't hire them back. But had one uncle that still stood in good, and he got all of his brothers back a job. Uncle Henry.
Okay, Mr. Crisp, tell us, we want you to add your story to this interview.
That was before my time.
But you
Well,
did.
actually, that all mine
Oh,
came
oh,
from-
oh.
Well, I do remember that my dad came here during the Depression. He had been in the electrical contracting business down in the eastern part of the state. And he came here about the time that Bill was talking about. I was 6 months old when I was born in 1934. And he would just do an odd job repairing people's cars and this kind of thing. And I had an uncle who was working in the mill at the time. And the strike started. And my uncle came and told my dad that he was going to lose his job because he couldn't get across the picket line. He said, and my dad told him, he said, well, if you get me a job, then I'll get you through that picket line. Because we were absolutely desperate for work and or income. And so my dad got my uncle through the picket line just by running 50 miles an hour right through it, and they jumped out of the way. That's how he got in there in the first place. And then ultimately, my mother and my dad were both working in Weaverly and saved up money twice to open up a mom and pop grocery store. And the first time he had typhoid fever, and then they had to turn around and start saving again. But they ultimately got it saved up enough to where they opened up a neighborhood mom and pop grocery store in 1942 and ran it for about 23 years.
And we previously referred to Crisp Grocery, which was your parents' grocery.
And I can remember very well back during that time, right in the middle of the war, rationing was such a problem that you couldn't buy sugar without a ration stamp, you couldn't buy gasoline without a ration stamp, you couldn't buy anything without the stamps. And we were blessed in that fact that we had all we needed there in the store because of having it at retail for sale. But
Johnny, y'all lived at the back of the store,
yes,
right? So,
and Everett Jones helped my dad remodel the place, and we lived in 2 rooms in the back end of that store, all up until I was a teenager, until we moved out.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about some other parts of Mooresville. We know that you all lived here in the southern part of town. Where'd you go to school? Where'd you go to elementary school?
South.
All of us went to South School.
Yeah. And do you remember any
Did
of
they
your...
have another one in town?
There's one other thing while I'm thinking about it. If I was, youngsters years like I am, you don't see it like you think, but you forget it. All of these streets around here weren't paved until after the war. And I can remember vividly when the streets were paved. And most of these houses did not have, they had indoor toilet, but they didn't have bathrooms. I mean, tubs and, this kind of thing. You had to take a bath in a tin tub. And not until, in fact, I can remember right up until 1950, nobody had electric power outside of the city limits. If you went out in the country, people were still using kerosene lamps. Only inside town did people have electric power. And there were many, many outhouses around here. Not in the middle, not in this part of it, but any place other than the mill village. Most of the people
outside the city limits.
Especially outside the city. And there were a lot of them on the end. I had the same uncle I mentioned there a while ago lived over on Patterson Avenue. He had an outhouse until 1945.
Do you all remember when they paved the streets?
It was 1940, right, 46, 47,
After the
45,
war.
right after the war, that they paved all these streets around here.
Do you remember what they put on before that?
Yeah, they would use water trucks and burnt motor oil.
Yeah,
Also cinders
the
out of
base
the
of it
mill.
was that old cinders.
Well,
burn coal in the mill that you never had the power.
That was
and
hard to go barefoot
cinders
on, wasn't it?
Yeah, you couldn't go on.
Yeah.
You had to buy the coal from the mill, right?
Yeah.
And another thing that I remember, most people didn't have refrigerators, you had ice boxes. And Uncle Remus, the black fellow with his horse-drawn wagon, I don't know if anybody's mentioned this before or not, but you had a square chart that had, I believe it had 5, 10, and 15 and 20, 25 pounds of ice, whatever you wanted, that number would put up.
Hang it up.
Was the top number that he knew when he pulled up how much ice he wanted. And as a child, I used to follow him down the street and catch the ice as he started off and eat it. But that's how you cool and you take your drinks and take a soft drink, put it on top of that block of ice because it would get a lot colder.
Then the milkman, we had a milkman deliver milk, sit it on the front porch, you couldn't leave it too long.
But the sun was shining.
Oh, right.
And talk about the grocery stores. A lot of you bigger grocery stores had people that went around and take orders in the mornings.
God, I'd forgotten about that. You're
Yeah.
right, yeah.
They'd take the order, and sometime during the day they'd deliver it.
Yeah.
They usually run 3 times a week. And you're talking about sweets a while ago. Art was talking about hard to get sweet. I remember one time all of us got to church that Sunday over at Broad Street, and my brother Cecil and I run home in a real hurry. This ice box brought it up. Daddy had made a banana cake and set it on the ice to get it in cold. We lifted the top layer off and cut the whole inside out and ate it and put the lid back on. And when Daddy cut that cake at lunchtime, Sunday dinner, the whole thing fell in. He couldn't whip us for laughing.
Pretty good trick.
Oh, me.
Yeah, we got a bath once a week, like John was talking about in the washing.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Except that I was on Saturday night, getting ready to go to church on Sunday morning up there at the Second Presbyterian. And an old fellow named Oscar Moore, he was the janitor up there. And Oscar hired me one time to help dust the seats and all that stuff. But he would be up early and the church bells would always ring, 15 minutes before for Sunday school or whatever. And they moved that bell out of that church over to the Fieldstone Presbyterian, when we moved over there.
Anything else anybody wants to add?
I can remember, too, back, we wore clodbusters. We called them clodbusters. I guess y'all had a pair of them, didn't you? Old shoes had a hook on them, you lace them up, and the rubber wasn't too good on the bottom. Now you get 60,000 miles out of a set of tires. You might have got 60 days out of the sole on your shoes, as much as we walk. Then you just get some cardboard, cover the hole up, and keep on going.
Because you walked everywhere you went.
Walked everywhere we went. Johnny had a car. His family had a car. It's the only one I know of around there. I remember it was a
37 Ford.
37 Ford.
That's what I learned to drive on.
In fact, I bought a 37 Ford up in Statesville for $75. And when I went off school, I sold that car to Johnny's daddy, but he had one exactly like it. Kind of looked like Al Capone's type car, black gears in it. And said, if you're going to stop down here at the corner, you better put on brakes at this corner, so they might get you.
They had them old mechanical brakes. And before hydraulic brakes were in the car.
Talk about cutting slabs for wood,
Yeah.
Daddy had an old T-model. You just jack it up, lift up one end to one side, put the belts on there and saw wood. We'd go around sawing wood all over the neighborhood.
Oh, yeah.
But one day Uncle Henry was driving, and one of the spokes fell out of the steering wheel and got caught in his britches. And was going down around where the scout hut is down here. And he couldn't turn, couldn't get off, do nothing else. Went down across there towards the Dye Creek.
But I remember the first self-propelled lawnmower. Hiram Brown's father, he was a machinist
Machine shop.
over the mill, and a regular push mower, he put a motor on it and some kind of chain or whatever, and he shut that off, and I'm telling you, it was eye catching up. I couldn't believe it. I don't know when that first started.
I didn't know he did that.
Yeah,
I don't know how I'm cutting crap.
but he made that mower like that.
Well, and we could talk about the social aspects of growing up. The church, as I said earlier, was a focal point. Sunday morning, Sunday school preaching, Sunday night, Wednesday night, we had PYF, we were Presbyterians, and the Baptists had their BSU and all. But what Sunday night we'd have PYF at the church, and sometimes we'd have refreshments
Yeah.
and a Bible study. And of course, school was big. Actually, at the high school, it was grades 7 through 12 at that time. The old high school on Academy Street, right across from the Central Methodist Church. It's gone now. Gymnasium's still there, used by Mitchell College, of course. And that was something too. We walked to school. It was a long walk from where we lived on Summer Street to South School even, but you had to get there. If it snowed, we went to school. We didn't. You wanted to go when it snowed because you thought nobody'd be there, but usually everybody was there, and you had school as usual.
Don't everybody walk.
That was right.
Miss Greenlee was our principal. Had some fine teachers through the years. Miss Miller T. Miller was teacher, and I worked with her in the school
And I
board
think
office.
she's still living.
No, she died about 4 years ago.
What did she?
And, not many of them living now. Mr. Stewart died recently too. He was a principal and a teacher at the high school. Dr. Scott, Dr. Morgan was superintendent. I worked with him 1 year when I came back to Mooresville, and he was a long-term person. I think he worked here 27 years as superintendent of schools. The schools were good. I always had good schools. Even now, the schools are good.
I want to go back to the community house because I know that was also a focal part of the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever have any kind of picnics or anything like that at the community house? Did the mill sponsor those?
The film that was made by Mr. Waters, who came through here making movies in the 37, 38, 39 period, on that film that he made shows a community picnic. The mill sponsored those there. Richard mentioned the picnic woods. Every July 4th in the picnic woods off of Messick Street in that area, down near the present golf course, the mill served barbecue, and everybody wanted to go to that. School was dismissed early so we could go, and they had contests. Had a greasy pole with a $5 bill on it. Everybody wanted to get the $5 bill. A good friend of mine, Jerry Swing, got it 1 year.
Yeah.
But community house was a focal point. The Boy Scouts met there.
Troop 6.
Some of the civic clubs met there through the years. And the community house is where they distributed the fruit. And that was always a big thing too. At Christmas time, the mill people, the mill company officials, gave each family a bag of fruit. And you go there at the community house and pick it up. And I remember the 1 year we went and they were playing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. They played it all day long. Gene Arkley had just recorded that. And
I remember I helped them in their bag of fruit. Did you ever do that?
they had the bag of fruit.
They had to give us a bag.
They get a little extra if you help bag, and it was always good. They sponsored softball teams, the Mooresville Moors softball team, and Johnny Miller was a pitcher, Clayton Dyson, who died about 2 years ago now. A lot of Dingler fellas, Charlie Dingler still lives. He played with the team. They went to tournaments, went to Florida.
Right.
And you could tell when a ball game was going to be played because the mill company, people had to clean up the field, scraping the field, lined it off. And we couldn't play on those days.
Right, yeah. Right.
Had to stay off the field, but the game was going to be played that evening. They had bleachers there.
Big crowds came
Oh,
through.
yes.
That was good entertainment. They had a picture, Johnny Miller.
Johnny Miller,
He was
Clyde
about
Murray.
6'6", 250 pounds, fastball type. Wasn't slow pitch. And I mean, you blink your eye, you couldn't see the ball. You better be ready.
Harold Oster was a catcher. Those experiences we had, those were big days when the team played there. And they also played at the Mooresville Park down on Broad Street too, at night under the lights. And Jimmy Farrell worked at the community house, and that was always a prime job.
Right.
Everybody wanted that job. You were in charge of recreation. You gave out the ping pong paddles and the horseshoes. He said you could play tennis. And I don't know, he makes 75 cents an hour probably, but
Yeah.
that's a whole lot more than mowing grass. But Jimmy would be the person who announced the softball game at the Mooresville Park. We went up on top of the building, little broadcast booth up there. And we got to go up there and with him a lot. And Ott and I sold tickets for Ed Sweet.
Right.
Mr. Ed Sweet was in the Navy. He was a boxer, a middleweight champion. And he was in charge of recreation. Mr. Fred Holt was in charge of recreation. Had a football team one year.
Yeah.
Mr. Holt coached the football team. And, people like Owen Hager, Bob Dingler, Charlie Dingler, Bill Dingler, Bobby Moose played. My brother played. Bill Sinclair played. And they played the junior varsity teams. And it was a good experience.
I know we'd come up summertime, all would meet up there in the ball field. We'd choose up sides, you know. Everybody would want Gus Dingler, the #1 player on their team. Remember that? They want Gus because he could hit the ball. So the fence wasn't hardly any further than the road up here, and if we hit one over that, now we really thought we were great ball players. But we used to make a lot of our balls. You know, you didn't have the money to buy baseballs, so my daddy used to bring spools of thread home from the mill, and we'd get a wad up piece of paper and wind that, just keep winding until you got a baseball like that. Then just take a needle and thread and just sew it where the string wouldn't come out. And a lot of times we played
black tape on top of it.
Yeah, black tape on top of
I
that.
forgot about that.
Odd, you know, we'd go down to the ballpark, and we didn't have money to get in, we'd hope to get a foul ball. Take that ball to the gate, then let you go in. Gus was the best of the world. Gus would get those balls, and the ball boys worked for the baseball team, the company, and they'd come out looking for them too. But Gus was always fast. He'd get them and hide them. After he had 2 or 3 for the next week's games, then he'd get one and go in and watch the ball game.
Then the ticket taker, we'd stand there at the door, you know, we wanted to see the game, and somebody hit a home run, and the ticket taker would run up and look. While he did, we went down the side and get in there free. He never did catch it as fast.
We got a lot of free games.
Any of you remember the chicken coop?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah.
They had a chicken coop down there on the side. It was nothing but a cage with wire around it and seats in it, little bleachers. And they let all the kids in to keep us out of the grandstand, aggravating the paying customers. And you had to go in the back gate and they'd escort you and lock you in. Well, we soon found out if you create a commotion, like pick a fight, get over in the far end of that thing, they'll come in there to break up the fight, and you can empty that thing in 2 seconds. As soon as they open that door.
And just like in my opinion, the Mooresville Cotton Mills, the big factor in Mooresville's growth and development, minor league baseball was big also. Class D League, the North State League, produced, of course, we mentioned some major league players. It provided recreation. That's about the only recreation a mill had. And you can look at the mill when the ball game was going on up in the upper level, in the weave room there on the end, people hanging out the windows trying to see the score and going back and tell others what the score. You know, Mooresville Moore was big.
Right.
And it just, something that the lights went on, we went to the ballpark.
But Bill, back in those days, we had no coaches. There were no little leagues, so you learned everything on your own, or what some guy would tell you. And if it hadn't been for the community house with the basketball goals up there, I doubt if Bill would ever play for Appalachian State. So
That helped, that we had some growing up to do there, and playing on a dirt court. The ball was flat most of the time, but I did have height then, and
oh yeah, yeah.
that was one way that my destiny, and a lot of folks had the same destiny, just like Richard worked out of the mill making his own company, $1 million plus company a year. I went to Brevard. John went to the Air Force, I believe. I had a scholarship to Appalachian, and that helped us. People talk about escaping the ghettos, but we certainly didn't live in a ghetto. But comparable, like Richard said, we had sometimes what we needed, sometimes we didn't. But if it hadn't been for basketball, I think I'd have been a 3rd shift worker maybe, or a 2nd shift worker, running a set of looms.
Yeah, unless you worked your way through college in the mill village, very few people went unless you worked your way through there.
Bill, you referred quite a bit to that in your book. Would you show us your book that you wrote so we can have that?
The book was something I always wanted to do, and unfortunately I didn't do it while my mother was still living. She had been an excellent resource for things in the mill. But the chapter on the Mooresville cotton mills I entitled "The Mooresville Cotton Mills: A School of Hard Knocks," because if you ever worked in the mill, second shift or third shift, as we did, it was a school of hard knocks. My first job was the Ix mill in Candillas. Ott and I went down together. As he said, we grew up together, good friends even now. They had two jobs. One was a second shift job, and one was a third shift job. Well, I looked like I was 19 or 18, and Ott said, "Well, Bill, I'm not old enough." I said, "I'm not either." So Ott said, "I'm 17. He got the second shift job. "How old are you, Brown?" "I'm 18. I wanted to work." I told the story, told a lie. Learned not to lie. I worked the third shift, sweeping the weave room, cleaning looms, and I had to I got a ride with a guy who was a weaver. I paid him a week, every week for riding with him. But then the Mooresville cotton mills, Mr. Homer Happy was in charge of the design department. And the Swiss warpers. The Swiss warper was a warp making machine that did the sample warps. See, the mill had offices in New York. They had big operation, and they would take orders from companies, and some of the prettiest material you've ever seen. But I worked as a creeler hand. The creeler hand took off the empty yarn spools, put on the new yarn for the next design that the operator, the Swiss warper operator, had to design. You had to put in so many of this and so many of that. Then you'd pull it to the reel there, and they made samples. Mr. Homer Happy was a Boy Scout leader, and he took a liking to me, and he got me a job as a creeler hand one year, and the next year I ran the warper on the second shift, made $1.30 an hour, 6 days a week. And talking about saving a little money.
What year was that?
That was 1952, if I'm not mistaken. I was in college. And Mother would call me and say, "Mr. Hampy's called, and he wants you to come by and see him. He has a job." And that solidified where I'd have money for clothes and things to go back to school. I had a scholarship, but still, you had to have other money. But the book, the only chronicling of a concise chronicle of the strike is in here. And the people of Mooresville are immune to the whole idea. I spent hours talking to Mr. Brantley, Mr. Sam Edmiston, other people who experienced it firsthand, Luke Dorton. And Mr. Luke Dorton had pictures that Fletcher Davison made. Fletcher was the mill photographer. Then one day he was told, "We no longer need you," and they set his stuff out in the hall. And Fletcher got everything, I guess, except a box of pictures. And Mr. Luke Dorton picked those up. Some of those pictures are here. And his daughter Patty still has some of those pictures. But the idea here was to show some things to my town that I grew up in Mooresville and worked as school superintendent, and pay back. And this is one thing I did, and it was very successful for Jewel. My wife helped me, and we got this done. Ott came to a lot of the book signings, and he'd tell stories on the side about things. I didn't pay him. I didn't know I should have paid him for it. But Mooresville was a great town. It was a great town to grow up in.
Yeah.
Well, the Mooresville Museum is thankful for your book because it does chronicle much of the history of Mooresville, particularly of the mill, and that, as you have said, is a major part of the history of Mooresville. It was Mooresville for many, many, many years, and so we do appreciate the fact that you did write this book.
You know, I think another fellow up here in town that grew up here, he and I were discussing the fact that the time that we grew up in the 40s and early 50s, I think was the best time in the entire century, 20th century, to have been the age that we were. Because right after we grew up, the next generation got into all this doping. We didn't know what dope was. Grass was what grows in the yard.
Coke was a drink.
There was little to no crime at all. And people behaved themselves back then. Today,
Do y'all want some water?
everything is so much different. I mean, the generation before us had to deal with the Depression. Of course, we had to deal with World War II. I never will forget when the day that the war ended here in August of 1945, people were blowing horns and church bells were ringing throughout the entire day. I mean, I was 11 years old when that thing ended. And every day when I would look at the morning paper to see where the front lines were in Europe after D-Day. And when the Battle of the Bulge took place, it scared the living daylights out of me because I thought the Germans were going to win this war after all.
Did you have anybody in your family that was serving in the war?
I had a cousin.
Uh-huh.
But there were so many people who I knew back then who were in the war.
Back there were three guys. One of them lived right here on the corner. Another one lived in this house right here. And the next street up got killed in World War II. They were Tom, Dick, and Harry. That was their
Tom
three
Swan, Harry Sykes, and Dick
names.
Saker. Richard Saker.
They're right here in a circle.
Now, many of our Mooresville people were killed in the war, and at one time, the Mooresville Mill, right at the entrance, there was a plaque there listing all of the mill employees who served in World War II.
I believe that plaque is
I
at
hope
the
it's
War
still
Memorial.
there.
It's at the War Memorial.
I moved it, okay.
Yes.
They took care of that, and I'm glad they did. But the number of people who were killed was quite a number. And my uncle served. We were threatened with service in the Korean War. We were in high school when the Korean War.
Yeah, I was Korean veteran.
And Herman Hedrick was a neighbor of ours. We lived on Summer Street. He lived on Spruce Street behind us. Herman was killed in Korea.
What was his name? Baker?
Don Baker was killed.
Lloyd?
Doug Lloyd was killed in Vietnam.
Oh, Vietnam. That's
Yeah,
what
he
it
was
is.
in Vietnam. But a lot of our people gave their life to defend this country.
Well, you take right down here, Tom Swan,
Mm-hmm.
2 houses down.
Tom, Dick, and Harry.
Tom Swan.
Isn't the VFW
Swan.
named for Swan, Tom Swan?
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the name of that. When's this museum going to open?
That's a good question. We're not real sure at this point, but
There's a lot of work to be done.
but we are preserving this history now
Oh, yeah.
because we want to make sure that it gets preserved. And I do thank you, gentlemen, for coming. Is there anything else you want to add?
And did you,
I wanna
during
ask
the matter of
you-
introduction, mention the time frame that we're talking about?
Well, Mr. King talked about this was in the 40s,
Yeah,
Right.
in the 40s and 50s. You said that also. Mr. Newton, you said something you want to say?
You mentioned Claude Little.
Yes.
He played for this July the 4th Affair Community House. That was the first time I'd ever seen anybody doing a jitterbug. Now they could put it on. And the picnic, down in the picnic wood, they always paid for 2 bands at the old skating rink. They put one bunch on one side that played string band. The other side was Claude Little. And I played with the group over here that hillbilly, I guess you'd call them, guitar and bass fiddle. We'd play and then Claude had to go over and play with Claude for a while. I never did get to stop.
Did the mill sponsor the band?
Huh?
Did the mill have anything to do with the band?
No.
They paid
that
for
was
it.
high
They
school.
paid for uniforms or anything? Or was-
You mean the high school? You
At
talking about
one
the high school
time,
band?
you're right. One time the mill did sponsor a band. They
Yeah.
played at the community house. My uncle Walter Hutchbeth,
He played the
in
tuba.
that day, he played the tuba, right.
Daddy played the tuba.
And that was done. They had uniforms, and there were some pictures of that. And Yvonne, I don't know if he still has it. Jack Moore has another publication that is very rare. I tried to get one, and Jack had 2 and wouldn't sell me one, sold somebody else later. So I couldn't buy hardware products there. No, I live here. But that book has pictures of the men who served. It has pictures of how things looked at one time. Had a picture of Second Presbyterian Church when they had a bow-type window. It was a frame building. I have a picture of it when the frame building came off the bulletin. Now, brick veneered while we were there a lot. They raised money and brick veneered. But there's so many things out there that I came across when I did that work. So Richard, Jack Morris, Turner Hardware, he kept it in his office back there. A very valuable piece of work.
What's the name of it?
I don't recall the name. And then the Tribune did one about 5-6 years ago. And I had a copy of that book, and I must have loaned it to someone.
What is it?
Yeah.
$1 a year?
Me.
Yeah, you have it.
It's not, well, I've got one from like back in the 90s.
Yes.
Well, yes,
Yeah,
sir.
it's a
It's kind of-
centennial or
you
not
have that
centennial,
book.
but like, yeah.
So
I
I
have
loaned it to you, okay.
Okay.
I'll make
It's
the reason I
called
mentioned
Looking
that,
Back.
There's a picture in there of a group who worked at the mill. Mr. Brantley
Mhm.
started the first payroll process with a card system, forerunner of the computer. It was a card system, IBM type card. Juanita Davis, Juanita Blackman Davis, Lewis Davis worked in that office. That's why I mentioned Juanita to you, Dan, because she'd be a valuable resource.
And Brother Cecil.
Cecil,
Payroll.
he had the payroll department.
Which Mr. Brantley are you speaking of?
Mr. Robert, he's dead. He died maybe a year ago. I went to his house and we spent, actually in his backyard, he had a flower basin, Richard, and all that was made from the basin that they had in the mill. A big basin,
Wash basin.
wash basin, and had water spouts all around. You step on the rod on the floor and water run. Well, he took that big basin out of the mill and put it in his backyard. Quite a piece.
Still take
Mr. Brantley, I don't know if I can get his name or not. I cited those people who helped.
Well,
me.
that,
Yeah,
He
it's
lived
got
on-
strong. You mean, we got,
Yeah.
it's black.
gentlemen, we do so thank you for coming and sharing these stories of growing up in the Mooresville Mill Village. The museum appreciates this, and you have given us stories and insights into a vital part of the history of our community. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, man.
Thank you.